Hey everyone, welcome to a very special edition of AppleTV's Creative Forces. I'm Jeff Lee, and I'm very excited to kick off today's event with some of the production team behind the award-winning documentary Boy State. You'll meet a panelist in a few moments, but first I wanted to remind everyone that we'll actually be fielding all the questions via the YouTube live chat feature. So please drop your questions in the chat, and we'll do our very best to get to every single one of them. We're joined today by an amazing ensemble, including directors Amanda McBaine and Jesse Moss, as well as the cinematographers behind this compelling story, all of whom which belong to the Camera Collective, a group of New York City cinematographers known for their cinema verite work. We want to also thank Apple, A24, and of course Canon for helping us make this event possible. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's event. Please welcome award-winning documentary filmmaker Marshall Curry. He most recently won an Academy Award for the Best Live Action Short, The Neighbors, guiding the conversation for the next hour or so with the team with Boy State. So without further ado, Marshall, thank you and for joining us.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Well, I want to introduce the directors, Jesse Moss and his partner and co-director, Amanda McBaine. I got to know Jesse years ago when I was just getting started on my first film, and he had a head start and was incredibly generous and kind with advice and encouragement, and it's been fun to follow both of your careers in the years since then. But so much love has been heaped on this movie, and it is really well deserved. I know that it can be hard to do politics in a way that's heartwarming and entertaining, and you guys really by focusing on the characters and focusing on the intimacy of the human stories. This is going to be a fun conversation to just talk about the cinematography, though. And I've also been lucky enough to work with a few of the cinematographers on this project, and Wolfgang and Daniel Carter. Thorsten, do you want to just start by introducing the team that shot this film?
Thorsten, you're muted, I think.
Yeah, sorry about that. So I'm very happy to have you all on here. Wolfgang Held and Martina Radwan and Claudia Raschke. Daniel couldn't join. Unfortunately, he's on a shoot out in the snow in New York. Yeah, it's wonderful to have you all here and see you again after such a long time.
Well, Jesse, why don't we start with you? Can you tell us a little bit how this project came together and how you started working with this team?
Sure. Well, thanks, Marshall. I do feel like we're kindred spirits in the way we tell documentary stories. And thank you, Able, for supporting this conversation. It's so great to have all of most of our cinematography team here. This is something we had hoped to do in New York in March in person, and we weren't able to do that. But now we're all together, and it's exciting to have this conversation. All of these collaborators were so instrumental in bringing this film to life. And I think in some ways it begins. Amanda and I have been filmmaking partners for 2 decades. Thorsten is a newer relationship, and I wanted to briefly talk about our professional life, which is kind of a funny story. But we made a movie called The Overnighters about 6 years ago, and I shot almost all of the movie. I shot about 99.8% of it. There was one particular clip from German television really needed to tell the story. And I was able to license it. It's a key moment in the film. And I remember looking at it, how it was shot. It was for TV news, but it was beautifully photographed. The cameraman was right in the face of Pastor Jay. And I thought, what TV news cameraman shoots this way? This is beautiful. What a scene. I couldn't have shot it better myself. And of course, it ended up in the movie. And I found out later, when Thorsten and I got to know each other and work together, that he shot it. And it's just kind of a marvelous serendipitous moment that I think I think it was meant to be. So we got to know each other working on a couple of projects for Netflix, and I knew he was a marvelous cinema verite shooter, as are all of the collective who I didn't really know. Martina and I had actually crossed paths briefly on a film a few years ago about William Kunstler, but I think, you know, with Thorsten, Amanda and I had a co-conspirator to kind of hatch this idea of making an immersive portrait of this program, Boys State, as a way of exploring American democracy in this tenuous moment. And I knew that this wasn't a film like The Overnighters or other films we've made together that I could shoot by myself. There's just no way to tell this story that way, that we would need a super group, an extraordinary team. So Thorsten and I began a conversation with Amanda as well about how to do it.
Right. And what was it about him that made you think he was the right person for a movie like this?
I think, what would you say? I mean,
I think we wanted folks with verite chops, and that's a certain skill set, but we wanted to kind of elevate the game visually on this particular film. I mean, there's plenty of scenes of kids in institutional settings that we knew were going to look kind of the same, and so to have an approach that was, you know, cinematic, I think that was going to be important to us. And Thorsten, we knew, had both those skills in spades, and so that was an obvious. It was kind of a no. I'm not sure. Yeah, it was very clear who we were going to go for.
The work that Thorsten for Netflix was not so much verite based, though. They were more interviews, and there were a few scenes, but we had not worked on a film like this before, and frankly, I wasn't sure I could trust anybody to do this. So that was really hard for me to let go a little bit. But it was clear that we needed to try to do that. And fortunately, I think Thorsten and I had a shared.
And Thorsten, tell me about these folks. What kind of directors are they?
Yeah, it's interesting because when Jesse and I started working on one of those early Netflix commissioned documentary series, 4K, and it was a big crew and interview based and lots of equipment, and we started shooting, and we both looked at each other and said, "This is too big. This is documentary ball." And we both started stripping down the crew and sort of find understanding that we both liked to be intimate with our characters and to be small, and that's how it started. Where we sort of connected, I think, in the very beginning. And, you know, I've since with Jesse traveled so much. We've been sitting in airports together and in hotel lobbies and driven through the country in cars. It was really always struck me with Jesse was the intimacy that he has with Amanda, every detail, and they would discuss what to do next. And it was beautiful to see that those two always were a team and sort of telling each other what they thought and making decisions. Amanda was not with us, but was as a executive producer in the film. That was beautiful. And what I really like about Jesse and Amanda is they have this really rare ability to embrace reality as it is and not chasing a dream of what it could be, what a film could be, but really commit to what's happening in front of them, and with that allowing this possibility to for unforeseen to happen, for things to happen that you could possibly not foresee, and that is always inspiring.
And Jesse, as you guys started thinking about what kind of film you were going to make, were there some films that were references for you or inspirations for you?
I'd say there was one in particular that Thorsten and I talked about, which was it seems a little presumptuous, but it's a scripted film called Son of Saul. Some of you are familiar with, and that it's a very powerful film about the Holocaust, and it puts you inside this world, this sort of unimaginable intensity and emotion, and it's shot in a very particular way. And Thorsten and I looked at that film, and we knew we were stepping into Boys State, this chaotic environment, but we wanted to be close to our subjects, the 4 boys that we were going to follow. And we discussed whether it was possible to shoot a verite film on a prime lens, which seemed like a tremendous risk for me. I'd never done that before. So that film and that technique, with a very shallow focus, actually, that separates the subject from this chaotic background, that really kind of brings us into their subjective point of emotional world. That was what we wanted to go for in some way. And I think that film was key in inspiring our thinking about how we would do that in this documentary.
Well, fortunately for a film where you need a crew as big as this one, when you get Thorsten, you get the whole collective. So can maybe Claudia, you want to tell me a little bit about the Camera Collective? Like, what is it, and what was the genesis? You're muted, I think. I think you might be muted.
Yeah, I am. I would say that the Camera Collective is obviously a collective documentary. You cannot foresee what the schedule that the story is focused on. And so sometimes when you have a schedule conflict, it is important you can step in and have the same sensitivity. And so Wolfgang, and especially Thor, was really instrumental of saying, like, we should build a collective so that we can back each other up. And just the 3 of us is just not enough. So we need to have a larger group. And so we, invited Martina and Axel Baumowitz. And with that, it was a very succinct team that very easily, when somebody was not able to really take on, or had a schedule conflict, then somebody else would gladly step in when available, really do it justice. And so, but I have to say that, in terms of how did it all really start, I think we were all sipping beer.
At Radega.
I mean, that was the beauty of it. It was just you and Wolfgang and I, and Wolfgang and I had been working on projects where he brought me on as a second camera operator for verite films, and Wolfgang and Claudia had been working so much, and so we just had beers together, and it felt so good to be able to just talk with somebody that understands what you are going through when you're shooting, and experiences, and we talked about issues we had and visions, and it just felt, every time we had those meetings, it felt like it was heartwarming, and then we invited others, and it just became this tight group, and we started working together. And I know Martina worked on this beautiful documentary that's still in the making, about women activists, and she had me shoot a little bit. And through that collaboration, where we often shot side by side, but also stepped in for each other at times, I think it was instrumental for this film, because we learned each other's sensibilities, and we found a way to communicate in a moment that is not going to happen twice. And we needed to capture that of that moment, and the narrative of that moment, and a lot of those moments are unforeseeable and are changing constantly. And so we became this group. I had this communication was just like looking over at the other person was enough to understand what they wanted to do. And so yeah, we developed this language that was really beautiful and effective, and because we all had was a big decision making point. Film Boy State, where we needed 7 shooters, and we needed to film 1 documentary in 7 days, most of it anyway.
It's funny because verite shooting, it's a very particular skill that
it is.
You know, it is visual, of course, but it's also, there's a particular temperament and a particular sensitivity to story and an ability to know what you need to get at any moment to tell your story. What do you guys think are some of the things that really separate a great verite cinematographer? What are some of those skills that somebody might not think of that are important? Wolfgang, I know you've talked a little bit about listening as an important part of it. Are there things like that you think are important to
I just wanted to go back for a second. I mean, I think what's great about shooting as a team on this was that I think every single one here, and Daniel and I, we all have worked together in teams of 2, which means when we meet each other in the same scene, we follow a character, we actually know how to do the dance, so to speak, how to shoot sort of effortlessly, but stay out of each other's way. We sort of understand whether who is leading and who is following, which sort of needs to happen at that moment. So I think that was good that we all had that experience. I've done it with Daniel Carter many times, and of course with Martina and Thorsten before, and Claudia also. So I think we had that sort of shorthand of like when we are in many of those instances in the film, we are with 2 characters that are meeting in a space together and how to shot part of like the power of this collective that I think made this sort of more effortless than I think it would have been with other shooters.
Well, let's talk about the look. How did you all come up with the look of the film? Jesse, Amanda, Tor, any of you guys?
I'd love to hear from Tor, from his perspective about that process. I mean, we talked about Son of Saul, but then the casting process, I think, kind of helped us refine. That was pretty extensive, and that was just you and I and Amanda in Texas, but sort of thinking about, would this work? Would this approach work, and what would it yield? What you want to talk about that, Thorsten?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I agree that in the casting process, we said, okay, let's try the 35 prime. Let's try a prime lens as a test, and I think that went really well. And the challenge really, how do you make a documentary or a film where you have 7 cinematographers, 7 directors of photography, if you will, working and shooting every day, and how can that at the end not look like a patchwork? And so I think that was the main argument to create a visual coherency with limitation. And I think to alter everybody with a prime, so that there wasn't going to be any zooming in and out constantly, any wide angle and super tights. Screen, and we tried it out for sort of during the casting process. And what we realized in the casting process is there's going to be a lot of boys sitting in groups discussing and arguing and having conversations, and a lot of the spaces they were going to be in were not in particular cinematic, or there wasn't going to be any beautiful light, and there was not going to be any time or resources for us to light these moments. And we filmed a few conversations with kids around a table, and it just turned out to be beautiful to see 5 or 6 kids in one frame and be able to focus rec from one face, somebody talking, and then you focus rec to somebody in the background listening or reacting to that. And it just proved to be a perfect aspect ratio to go with the widescreen, because a lot of the spaces had really ugly white ceilings and so we wanted to really compress that into the widescreen. And I think with the 35 and so those three limitations really helped to create that, to achieve that visual coherency.
And just for the gear nerds, what was your setup? What you guys shot with 35 prime? Also, did I read an 85 was on hand for some shots? And tell me about your gear too.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about a whole bunch of different cameras, and what was very clear is that we needed to be able, each of the shooters needed to be able to function an entire shoot day. And that could go up to 15, 16 days by themselves. We were going to be spread out across. There wasn't going to be people to run batteries for you, or run media or anything. We needed to find a solution in which we could send off Martina or Claudia, Wolfgang or Daniel to be attached to one character an entire day, and not having to go back and get more batteries or get more media. So we decided to shoot on a C300 Mark II, and everybody had a little fanny pack with a bunch of batteries, a bunch of media, a radio mic, and 185 lens, which I think if you watch the film, there might be 5 or 6 times where that lens is in. We have few scenes where we shot scenes that were more stationary, where the second camera would shoot on an 85. And that was it. That was the whole setup. It was tiny. There was like 8. Yeah, go ahead.
Which gave us the freedom to work with the 35 is that we knew we would have tremendous access. And I think typically when you, almost every documentary, you used to struggle with access. Where can you be in the scene? How close can you be to the action? But it required us to move, and which you see everybody on this team is so kind of intuitive about where they go, when they go. And I wanted also just briefly say one thing about this team, which is, I think, and you asked about sort of the requisite skills of a great cinema verite shooter, and I think it's a combination of ego and absence all of these people have. And I had worked with Martina and Thorsten, and I knew Claudia and Wolfgang by reputation, and these are some of the best in the world, I think, at doing this work. But I feel like they were also willing to throw themselves into this process, to understand that you don't need to have a crew of 6 people supporting you in the field. They were willing to work by themselves or with one person helping, but they were also not without ego is good. It's about being decisive in the moment, and all those decisions are so crucial. I think when you're you're not relying on a script, but just your feelings about how to cover a scene.
Challenging. I mean, I don't need to tell these guys that, like, to keep focus with all of the, be widescreen, and to have things, not on sticks. All of that is extraordinarily challenging, in addition to the days being long, in addition to, 100-degree heat in Texas, in addition to, for instance, with Wolfgang, like, he was following Robert, and Robert would literally run places, and he's a 17-year-old athletic kid, and we'd see Wolfgang keeping up with him, because you have to be close. It was an extraordinary challenge, and I think I'm still blown away by, I watched every frame of dailies, and it's just so much beautiful footage. I can't even really I still can't believe it, given what we were, what we had to work with.
In addition to the verite, there are moments that you cut to an interview. Can you tell me a little bit about how you decided where to do that, and how you wanted to shoot those interviews?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you all feel in the collective. I mean, it's a really interesting conversation about the interview in the verite form. And, there are the purists who say, nothing, no music, no interview, no nothing, just the handheld or whatever it is. And I'm not orthodox. And I think, what are the tools I need to tell this story? And what brings me inside the mind of this person that I'm following? And in casting, Thorsten mentioned we did begin to experiment with conversations and as a way of meeting the boys. So we shot naturally lit but formal interviews, and we really liked how they opened up to us. And we thought, well, how can we do this at Boys State? It's such a crazy event. There's no time, but I remember I think we got everybody together on day one, and we had this plan to basically build an interview set, and we didn't know if we'd ever be able to get them there. But we all got together and we lit. It's actually the most kind of formal thing that we did. And of course, everybody here lights and shoots beautiful interviews as well as verite. So I think, they got their hive mind together, and we came up with we had a great location. It's a dorm at the University of Texas. And we had it for the whole week. The people at the program said, yeah, it's yours. And it was really like a set. And I remember they just built a beautiful backdrop for this, and of course that couch that you see in the film, and then we just grabbed the boys, and not knowing what we would get.
Well, it's kind of great. There's something about the way that you all shot those that maintained the informal verite feel. The kids sometimes are splayed out on the couch or putting their heads down, so there's not a stylistic jarring feel as you go from the informal verite to suddenly, rigid ramrod interviews. You really found a nice way to make those two go together seamlessly. So
do we have a picture of the setup?
Yeah, I was just thinking this is the cue for the couch where we're all sitting in, right?
Let's see it.
If you find it, or we can.
They're trying to pull that up. Well, if it comes up, we'll pause. But there's.
Well, that's not the one, but
no.
I think there's
no. There's one where we're all sitting in the couch where the interviews are taking place. I saw it earlier in the preview.
We'll find it, but
we'll find it.
So your crew. There we go. That's it.
There it is.
Yeah.
And I think there's one of Robert lit for that interview too, as well. But it's a beautiful, and I think the rhythm of the event is so intense that it's nice for us to have a sort of a rhythmic break. Thorsten and I remember we had talked about how could we visually bring to life this event that wasn't like a run and gun verite style too, and that was something I don't think we ever figured out how to achieve. But the interviews do bring that. They bring a shift of momentum, of rhythm, and allow us to breathe, and then to get inside the heads of the boys. And that couch really was like a kind of therapeutic couch for them, and we invited them to lie down, as you say.
I was just gonna, how did you invite them? Would just at certain points you would say, hey, you want to go to the couch, or what would happen?
Honestly, I think the lying down really happened on the last day. They were so tired, having been through this week, and also they would sleep maybe 1 to 2 to 3 hours through the night. So then those lying down shots were from the last interview, the last day, where they were just.
But you
ready.
see, and like there's Robert. I mean, I think the couch in a way really was a safe space that we created, and that's where you hear his confession that he's been lying about his views. And we didn't know that was the case, that his views on abortion publicly were not what he felt privately. And it wasn't until he sat down on the couch, I don't know, the 6 days, that he said, no, I'm not telling the truth. And that was just, I guess he felt comfortable and wanted to share with us.
Mm-hmm. So you had a crew of 28, is that right?
Yeah.
And that was, how did those people break down? And What were all 28 of those people doing?
We had these folks plus Daniel plus Patrick is a friend and Verite filmmaker, and he lives in Austin, so he was another shooter, great shooter. And we had ACs. We had started out with only people from New York, Mark Roy and his son Drake, and then we had a local sound person who does a lot of this kind of work, Martin, working with Martina. But we were low on sound. That was a mistake in our prep, I think, in my prep, in thinking that we didn't need more power with sound, because this sound environment was unlike anything I'd ever been in before. I mean, I probably should have anticipated that 1,100 17-year-olds in a room is going to be a sound environment that every camera is going to need a sound help. So we, day one, pivoted pretty quickly and found every sound person who was available to work in Austin, and they came on set. And then we had a crew of PAs. We had to have people driven all over campus. We had I mean, it was a lot more actually like fiction sets that I've run, frankly, than any documentary that I've ever worked on. So it really felt like that kind of a setup. So we had the DIT in the war room. We had, one of our ACs elevated to being a DP on some parts of the shoot, IV2, and I don't know. It was a large organism, but everybody was game to pretty much push pretty hard. And I think everybody got invested in the story too. And that kind of helped gel us together.
But
I have to say, I just want to add something to what Amanda is saying. I mean, part of the amazing organization that you did, Amanda, was that you remember the room of the whiteboard, and you are completely laying out who is going where at what time in the morning, in the midday, who was having lunch breaks. I mean, I remember that your mind just being displayed on this huge whiteboard, and us coming together and kind of debriefing and talking to you so that you could take it in and reassign people. That was also the core. It's like your understanding and shifting the crew around of who was needed at what point, that communication skill, that focus on what was important for the story. That was your brilliance.
I think we have a photo of that somewhere, of Amanda at the whiteboard, which it was really a sight to behold.
I'm never going to do a production without a 40-foot whiteboard from now on. All documentaries are going to be made that way.
There it is.
Wow, look at that.
But that's also
only like a portion of it.
Because during that event, there were so many events going on at the same time to figure out which characters the characters. It's kind of easier for us because we stick on a character and we land up where they land. But every now and then you have to go away from them to find them again. It just needs that whiteboard and your logistical oversight, and also to find out where characters are meeting, where the important events, where the political events are happening that we have to focus on, which ones are letting go, because there's multiple things happening at the same time. So power to you. That was a pretty intense task.
But that really speaks to what Thorsten said at the beginning, that you guys are so able to focus on what's actually happening and not what we all had envisioned on some point. I mean, we all envisioned these beautiful moments in the dormitory where we're have intimate moments, and that never happened because at 2 a.m. maybe for 2 hours. And that was also for us to find that intimacy while you're in a sea of boys in white shirts, in white rooms. And that really speaks to your power, Amanda, and the board, that you could always immediately switch when something happened, when we came and downloaded. And of course, we are all so excited about our character, and we think our character is the greatest. And then you have to figure it out how they all, come together.
So you had a war room, though, which was where cards are being downloaded and backed up and people are coming to eat, and you're sort of getting an overview of the whole production. And then each cinematographer is assigned to a single character who they stay with through the whole week. Is that right? But some of the characters must have emerged through the week. I mean, you happen to stumble on the most important characters, seemingly, from watching the film. Tell me about that process. How did you know who to commit one of your valuable cinematographers to, and how many times did you have to say, like, okay, we're leaving that person and jumping on to somebody else?
Well, I know Wolfgang was there when Renee Otero emerged, and I think and Claudia, you were also. I mean, everybody was kind of scouting. They had characters that they had been paired with, or they were tracking, but they were also, we were relying on their antenna. And I'd love to hear kind of how you guys. I mean, you were watching. You were in rooms that we were not in, and you were hearing boys make incredible speeches, and you sort of that's part of what you had to do in addition to following the person we officially paired you with.
Yes, and sometimes, somebody was just not going to work out. They were not emoting, or they were not really focused in the way that we would like them to. And you have to make those decisions. But I think that is so key for us as a team, that we are all predominantly storytellers. And with that comes this whole notion of, yes, we still tell stories through cinematography, but you also have to make those choices very quickly when something happens and be really in tune. And that kind of pushes the cinematography to a different level, because it has to all feed and serve the story overall. And I know we were at times fishing and reporting back, and I remember specifically talking to Martina, because we were paired at times in rooms and doing the dance, and especially in the war room, talking about what works and what doesn't work. You remember, Martina, when we were doing the dance in one of the debate rooms with Renee and with Ben?
Yes. There was a moment where suddenly we had like four main characters in the frame, and it was just the two of us. And then you make the decision, like, or you switch within the scene from one character to the next, and then the other cinematographer has to come with you in order to keep covering the scene.
I mean, one thing that we had to do was kind of be matchmakers, and I mean, of course, well, I knew Thorsten pretty well. I knew Martina, but Wolfgang and Claudia not as well. And I didn't know Daniel Carter, but we sort of had to divine, well, who would pair well with Robert and with Ben and Stephen, and then Renee, who presented himself. And that's not science. And I don't know. I mean, Martina, I know so we said, well, here's Ben, get to know him. It's, you got to follow him everywhere. I don't know. I'm just curious for you guys, like how do you feel about our matchmaking?
Yeah, Ben had his challenges.
Well, tell me, actually, go ahead.
No, I mean, I really enjoyed actually having one character and getting to know him, and getting those quiet moments where he's not like, I mean, he's still in the room, but suddenly he becomes himself and not the persona that he presents in the room. And that also goes back to the 32 millimeter. It's like we were forced to be really close to the characters, so the characters would. Something else happens when you're standing right next to your character and not just somewhere in the corner and you're zooming in, and so it was really, I don't know, I really enjoyed creating that relationship, although it was challenging at times, simply because Ben and I are not always on the same page politically, but that's part of the challenge, or that's part of, like, how do you through the camera and still leave enough room, get the moments where the audience understands he's not that one-sided as he makes himself to be seen. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And in creating that trust with people, just as a kind of nuts and bolts, do you have conversations with them while you're not filming? How much do you react to people as they're doing things that you find funny or interesting? Like, I know that there are some filmmakers who think, oh, we want to be invisible So we just want to be blank slates. We don't want people to think about us. We don't as humans. And then there are other cinematographers who feel like, no, I want to have a real relationship with the person, so they trust me. How do you guys think about that?
I think it depends on the character. It's very different if you shoot with 17-year-old boys who are surrounded by other 17-year-old boys, because it's all about, you know, showing off and being very extrovert. Mm-hmm. So in that case, I pulled back. I tried not to influence him. Like, you know, he was on a mission. He had this, you know, he wanted to be a certain kind of personality, and I was at his home. So I knew a side of him that was different than what everybody else knows. So I didn't want to interfere with whatever his plan was.
I completely agree, Martina. There was definitely the whole power of the 17-year-olds all together in groups and just playing out their perspective and really having tasks to fulfill. It was not that they can lay back and really take us in. They were busy. They were really focused on winning and, you know, collaborating and marching forward with their agenda. And so at times I did experience that people became curious about me as a cinematographer and asked me certain questions, but because we were having a job to do and also focusing on the story, I also stepped back and just let it happen rather than, you know, getting involved with the various characters.
There's one scene that I really love with Ben, and unfortunately it didn't make it into the movie. It's like in City Hall. Partially also because City Hall is really beautiful and it was all dark wood. You know? But there was this one guy who was sort of like, you know, one of the jock guys, and he suddenly became Ben's friend, and it was a little questionable if that happened because of the camera. So that's one of those moments where I definitely would step back to not encourage that.
Mm-hmm. And Martina and Claudia, you all were in many cases the only women in a room of hundreds of 17-year-old boys. What was that like?
It depends a little bit on the topic they were discussing.
Yeah, I think for me it was more of that they actually were very respectful, so they weren't acting out, maybe because, you know, in their minds I was more reminding them of their mother, don't do this, but I don't know, you know, it's like they actually really ignored me. And so I never felt that there was really a gender issue. I was just, you know, the camera, and that was it.
Yeah.
Jesse and Amanda, as the story developed, how did it surprise you, and how did you kind of manage developments in real time in such a compressed shoot schedule? Tell me about that.
Well, in sort of following up on what Martina and Claudia were talking about, I think one of the things I also hadn't fully anticipated going into the shoot is the window that we had into boyhood. I think I've certainly never been in a room like one of those halls, you know, with 1,000 17-year-old boys and all that energy. And I think that my expectations going in were a little bit Lord of the Flies, like, well, this is going to go off the rails and be chaotic. And I think the surprise to me was actually how emotional the week was, and how Stephen really, who was a North Star for me, not just because his politics are more like mine, but because his sort of personality is more like mine, and I liked his low key kind of listening style. But the fact that he sort of rose to the heights that he did and the way that he did without compromising his principles, that was a great surprise, and that he really summoned people to their better selves as good politics. That's really the power of politics when it's at its best. So I think that was for sure when it was clear that that's where the story was going for him. It wasn't like that for him on day one and day two were rough. He was definitely in the weeds there, but he pivoted, to his credit, as did Ben. Both of them struggled in the beginning. We were worried we were going to have to drop them, but the great surprise is that then they both just rose and rose and rose for different reasons. And that's exciting when nonfiction subverts your expectations.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately you're putting your hands in fate. I mean, we have our team, we have our subjects, and then we're just going to have to see what happens and trust that this team is in the right place at the right time, which they were, whether it was the small moment or the big moment. Also, it was, I mean, there were certain things that were hard to track because we couldn't be with every one of our DPs at every moment. And so we would try to debrief at the end of the day and hear from Wolfgang and what happened with Robert and Martina. And we might have gotten fragments through the day, but of course they had the sort of the whole picture, and they were maybe more closely tied into the kind of emotional journeys that people were on. And so trying to kind of extract those details and to pivot, but really just to surrender to uncertainty, which is, I think, maybe Thorsten said, but so much of what the form requires is kind of do what you can and know what you can control and know what you can't, and sort of embrace the chaos, which is beautiful because life is surprising. And someone like Stephen, who Thorsten and I met really accidentally, emerges, and we're just along for the ride. That's what we hope for.
I've always felt
I do want to go. I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go.
No, I did want to go back to that, and you mentioned this before, Marshall. But the casting process was so instrumental in so many ways. And when we started, Jesse and Amanda had just gotten permission from the Boys State organization to participate in this, and it wasn't that long until the event was actually going to happen. And I remember Jesse and me were sitting in a car crisscrossing Texas, and we were in Houston, and Amanda would call and says, "Hey, I just got off the phone with this kid in Austin. You should go see him." And so we would drive to Austin and sit down with somebody and shoot with them for half an hour, a little interview. And we shot it so it could make it into a film. We had 2 cameras. It was just me and Jesse. And then Amanda would say, "I have another kid in Houston. You should go to talk to the kid." And we would drive back to Houston. And I have to say, Amanda, who was instrumental in this, did an amazing job in sort of, having that antenna and be really, really like go deep and do the work to find those kids and to filter them out. And we ended up almost all characters except for Renee before the event happened. And we had a pretty good idea of who to follow. And of course, we also got really, really lucky that those kids rose. But having had that relationship and with some kids we filmed multiple times before and an understanding who we are and who they are going into it was incredibly helpful.
How many people had you filmed before the first day of the actual event?
I mean, many, but the ones that we were committed to really immersing ourselves with, that was maybe 5, really, that we had appointed cameras to. So Ben, Stephen, and Robert, but also there were 2 other kids that we had filmed with significantly at home and came in on day 1.
Well, Claudia was with Ben Lux for some time, who we thought had potential to do very well, and I don't know what happened.
It was really interesting. No, he was a homeschool kid, debate champion, like kind of delightful, but he didn't really advance very far. He tried.
And when you all were gathering footage, did you review your rushes as you were going, or how did you know of the different cinematographers were shooting?
Impossible.
I love that question.
This is what happened. They would have to just tell you.
Yeah. The process of getting, first of all, I don't even remember the numbers, but the amount of footage that was coming in on a daily basis, right? 7 cameras shooting almost all day long, like so many terabytes that then need to be cloned, and then they need to be put onto the Pegasus Mega Drive, and that one needs to be cloned, and then it needs to be turned into proxies. I mean, I can't really imagine watching it be through cameras, but I can't. There's no way that process. Plus, I didn't have time to sit down and watch anything. I mean, our day was full shooting and following and trying to keep the tiny plane from.
I mean, the closest
crashing.
I came was picking up a camera and looking and filming myself, which I'm used to doing as a director and cinematographer, and sort of thinking through the camera, which everybody on this team was able to do. But for me, it's such an important part of the process of deciding what's important, what's not important, how I make sense of what I'm filming. And so I kind of needed to be filming, but of course that blinded me to everything else that was going on in every other place. So, but I think it did help. Like I'm personally more comfortable filming. And so I'm glad I was sort of thrust into having to throw myself back into the fray a little bit. And if you see any out of focus and shaky footage, it's probably mine. But I was sort of an all hands on deck, and that's why we promoted Ivy, our AC, started operating.
I did sound with you on a number of.
Oh yeah, there's me, and that's Daniel Carter filming with Stephen giving his magnificent a speech for the governor's nomination. And you can see how close Daniel's got that great angle on Stephen, and I think he gets a step closer than that even, and you're just right up on his face. It's beautiful, and you just see him find his voice. I mean, that is what we live for, I think, in documentary storytelling. You've invested in this young man you care about. He's on a journey, and he surprises you. He surprises himself.
But that's a really great example, that moment, right? It's like, because then something happens in the speech, and then one camera steps forward and the other camera falls back, and you just know, you just know what the other cinematographer sees, and which angle would be more expressive in that moment. And then you have a close profile and a wide shot from behind. So that photo was a perfect example of like how you do the dance and how you get that moment of into himself.
I learned how hard it is to pull focus at f2 when you're moving and your subject is moving, and that I don't wish that upon my enemies. That is very, very hard. Hats off to this team.
The amazing thing is when you film like that, with this one f-stop and the one lens, and you have the headphones in, what starts happening to me after a while, I feel like I'm watching a 14-hour movie through a viewfinder. I just get in a zone. You're with your character. If you have long enough stretches where you just keep shooting, you feel like everything is one long movie, and it's just a beautiful zone to be in, where all of a sudden the focus pulling becomes go where you want to go and follow the character, and because you have the headphones on, you're seeing it on a little screen. It becomes your own little movie, and it's kind of a beautiful world to live through and try to feel out the characters and find the cracks in the character, the drama, where you feel like something goes beyond the surface, which took a while with Robert, but that did happen. And then the confessional on the couch made it all clear that what I was sensing was really happening, that he was actually playing an act that wasn't really him. And it's so nice when you're in that zone, in that movie world. And that's why this kind of filmmaking is so fun, when you have the time to flow with the characters for like 14 hours.
Yeah. But that's what I love about Verite. When you're hanging with the same character long enough, you can anticipate. You're not just trailing behind the action. You really anticipate what he's going to do next, or most likely what he's going to do next.
Right. That's the beauty of it. You learn the body language of somebody after a couple of hours, and you can just tell what's going to happen. And the other thing with that lens and sort of that approach is, and Wolfgang, you can maybe talk about this more eloquently than I, but there is such an honesty to that lens and to the proximity you are to your subject, that you can feel as a viewer, and you can feel it when you're watching your 14-hour private movie through your viewfinder. You can just feel the distance, and you, as a viewer, understand that the subject knows there's a camera. You're not peeking in on somebody. You're right there with them, and you're living what they are experiencing. And the 35 gets pretty close to our real life visuals of our human eyes, and there's just an honesty to that I find really fascinating, with being so close to a subject and not zooming in and running around. Yeah.
If you look at those shots on the screen that are coming up, it's to your point, I feel like this honesty, we talk endlessly in the Camera Collective of zoom versus prime lenses. The beauty of these wider prime lenses, where you get close-ups, you sort of have to know the character and be invited in. I think it's kind of an honest, intimate perspective. It's not zoomed in, it's not voyeuristic. You're really in their space, you know them long enough, they let you be there, and you experience in the world with them. You're really in there with them. You're not just far away observing them. I think there's something that I've always admired about that, and that's why I love that sort of zoom lens, that prime lens shooting, and not just always zooming in, which has its place. But I think for this kind of stuff, it's just so immediate, and you're so much in their world. And I think it's just great to have that, simplicity throughout for everybody with that lens. It makes
what's interesting about looking at the production photos where you see you guys operating is how conspicuous you are, how big you are in a way. And it's a testament to the relationships that you're not invisible. You're really subjective, and you're making subjective decisions. You're not hiding or hanging back. You're really right there, but they're sharing. And I think audiences can read that themselves. I think people question in a film like this, they say, well, it feels very narrative, or like, I can't believe the coverage, and it feels like fiction. But I think for us, it feels like good documentary storytelling, where you're making kind of intuitive decisions about which angles you need and when to move, and you're getting close, and it's not because you manipulated anything, and you just earned the right to be there.
I think a lot of cinematographers, when they're first starting to shoot verite, they imagine that you want to be invisible, or that you want to be the fly on the wall. And I remember Tom Hurwitz telling me once that people don't like flies. Like, they shoo flies away. You don't want to be a fly on the wall. You want to be a friend in the room who's witnessing something that's happening. And I think that the best verite cinematographers give that feeling of just an empathetic, curious presence that's not invisible, that's not hiding behind furniture with a zoom lens in the corner, but is just somebody who characters decide they want to share themselves with.
And I think it's why it's nice to see photos where people put the camera down. We saw that one with Wolfgang, and there's one of Thorsten. And those moments are as important as anything you capture on screen too.
Mm-hmm. We're getting some questions in over the chat that I wanted to make sure we had a little time for. Some folks are curious about media management, both in the field and for post between multiple cameras. Sort of, how did you handle that in both of those scenarios, in both those places?
I'm like getting a headache already, just like thinking about how to answer that question.
Thorsten, you want to take that one?
Oh, I have no idea how we did it. I mean, I remember sending lists of equipment to Jesse and Amanda in the prep, and you guys didn't even. You were so deep in prep that you were just like, okay, whatever. And I remember calculating the amount of media we're gonna have and hard drives, and I remember when I sent that email, Amanda called me 2 seconds later. Like, there's a mistake in this. There's no way we can accumulate this much media in one day. And we went over the numbers over and over again, and it just turned out to be terabytes per day.
And I remember we had a media management team. There were 2 guys. They were like they were pros. I mean, they had been on much more elaborate or scripted productions, and I think that's what we all needed. Is they came with their cart and their system, and they were just locked in, and they were worked all night. I think they worked in shifts, not because
that's right.
Yeah. And are you naming your files by characters, and then it has time of day runtime on it, or how are you keeping track of that?
Yeah, no, what Thorsten, what you did right is everybody was jam syncing to Mark Roy's time code, right? Am I right? You synchronized all the cameras.
Yeah, it was actually quite smart, because Mark had he brought every piece of sound equipment he had, and one of his sound mixers he actually dropped with our interview setup, where we had 2 stationary cameras that were always there, and the lighting setup, so we could anytime go to that interview setup and shoot an interview. And then he dropped another sound kit in our war room, so everybody that came in, whenever they came in the morning, they could just walk with the camera right up to that thing and plug themselves in and get the time code for the day. That was really smart and effective. And then we just named at each camera had a letter, and then was it. I think that was the end of that. We named the cards every day. We started at 0. I'm sure there's like a lot smarter systems how to do it, but also if we had 16-hour day, nobody was going to go into the camera and like go into the metadata of like giving whatever. Like we had no time for that. We just gave it a number and a letter, and that was the end.
And it was heroic work. A shout out to the post-production team, but Connor Hall, multi-clipping, the multi-cam footage with 4 characters in a verite scene with soundboard feeds and lavs and booms. And that was heroic work to kind of unpack the media and just lay it out in a way that we could actually work with it. So I don't know if there's a better system. I mean, it's the system we had,
Were there particular scenes? I imagine that each of you has some favorite moment that either made it into the film or didn't. I wonder if you want to go around and talk a little bit about just some of your favorite moments in the film.
Maybe I start while everybody's thinking about Robert. It's actually a scene like Martina's that didn't make it into the film. And I think scene where Robert was on a football field, and he was sort of instigating sort of almost a hazing-like event with a slightly chubby fellow student who didn't want to run a relay race with them, and he got a whole crowd together and shouting at him to run that race, and he was the instigator, and make him feel calm. And it was a complete flip, and it was the first time I started seeing the other side of Robert that was not just playing to the crowd, to the crowd and wanting to be the boss. So that was a moment, and I think parts of that are in the film maybe as a shorter moment, but it's not the full scene. But that was the moment that I really, that's the first time I got another side of Robert, a softer side and a human caring side and an emotional side that drew me into him.
Similar moment with Ben, which again didn't make it, but like in that, I think it was the last night during and Ben called his dad, and suddenly after like yelling and screaming or talked to his dad and was asking his dad he's like, what am I doing? And that was really beautiful. And it was like very dark, and it was on him, and I think I found some flair or something that then gave us something other than darkness. But it was a nice moment, very intimate, while the crowd was cheering in the background.
Martina, that scene was in the movie at some point. Sorry.
One of the scenes that was very memorable to me was actually at the very beginning of just getting a sense of what this was all about and how it would play out. Was that we were in this classroom stuffed with these 17-year-olds, and they were instructed and what to do and for if they're going to go for a governor or whatever position. And everybody was kind of like relaxing and being very cool in their seat. And all of a sudden it was like, okay, here we go. And that switch over from being like, I'm so cool, to, oh, now I have to get the signature. And I don't know these other kids, and I have to convince them that they're going to vote for me or give me their signature and believe in me. And what am I going to say? That whole amazing turnaround of everybody being in action and everybody recruiting each other and, kind of bonding over signatures and supporting each other, that was an amazing feeling. And I really love the white screen for that, because it really gave you a sense of the multiple conversations, not only the one character that I was following at that time, but the multiple conversations and how it was intertwining and how we were moving through the crowd to get that sense of excitement and strategizing.
Wow, that's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, I think my favorite moment was with Steven when he didn't win, and it was beautiful I met Steven with Jesse when he was campaigning in his hometown for a local politician, and he was walking from door to door, and he was the only kid that didn't invite us to his house. We never met his parents or his mom, and there was something a little sad about that he didn't want to share where he comes from, and he was so shy, but he also was so driven, and then he went through Boy State, and he dreamed so big, and he changed, and he became such a force of nature, and wrote these beautiful speeches and delivered them, and then that moment where he didn't win, he started crying, and he walked back to his dorm, and he sat down, and he called his mom. That was the first thing. He called his mom, and he said, "I didn't win, but it was one of the most amazing experiences in my life." And just us being there, I think it was just me, Jesse, and our sound person, Mark, and just feeling that all the relationship building with him has paid off, because there was no question of like him wanting to have a private moment. We were just there, and that was okay. And then he was done with the phone call, and he just sat there, and a friend came over, one of the other Boy State participants, and gave him a hug, and there was a beautiful moment that is in the cut also. And at some point we just put the camera down, and we gave him a hug, and we just talked, and we laughed together, and that was a really memorable, emotional moment for me. Yeah.
You and Amanda have one in particular that they're all your children. They're all your children.
No, and I think that moment. I think we have maybe a photo of that moment with Steven and Thorsten. I just feel like everything. Yeah, it's so transparent, so raw, so real, so much in a small moment, but sort of everything you've worked for in the movie. And to come by it honestly, right? And I think in constructing the film in the edit room, which was a long process, it was really wanting to get to that place in the movie in a way that we got to ourselves, Thorsten and Amanda, and all of us who went on this journey, what we felt making the film, to translate that onto the screen. Because it's one thing to have it in the dailies, but it's another thing to summon it in the film itself, and that's what took a long time to get right.
There's a real humanity in it. As cinematographers, do you find it difficult to film people at moments of pain? I sometimes feel like there's, like I don't want to be a vulture who's just grabbing my shot and thinking about the light and focus and framing of somebody who you've grown to really care about. And sometimes when I'm shooting moments where somebody's suffering, I find it hard to know that I need to do my job. And also I feel tempted to just put the camera down and give that hug. And how do you manage those two instincts?
If I may go first.
Yeah.
For me, I've been certainly in many different situations where it was very heartfelt, because when you have a character who's being triggered and has an emotional breakdown in one way or another, either being incredibly sad and full of despair, or being really angry and charged, I usually gauge by how much they let me continue filming, or if they're giving me a sign saying, look, I need a break. And I honor that. And I let them know every time I film that they have the prerogative to say, no, I need space. Because it is this very delicate balance of wanting to continue that relationship and that story, and giving them the voice and the space and the safety to be themselves and to be emotional and trusting the whole process of telling their story. So I do gauge it by their behavior. My desire to comfort them does get pushed to the back. It doesn't mean that I don't feel it intensely. There've been so many times when I'm near tears that it is incredibly difficult for me not to have this visceral experience of, oh my God, I feel every heartstring. But I guess at that point, I feel so responsible to honoring their story, their voice, their emotion, that, you know, I just step back or I push to stay with them.
Yeah, I also struggle with that still, you know, in every film. That never goes away. That's a continuing theme through all what we do. You know, when I started out with Children Underground, where the kids were cutting themselves, you know, that's a documentary on homeless kids. And, you know, when do you step in and stop them? You know, I mean, with tears and emotion, I find if I feel personally it's cathartic tears, I sort of love filming it. I actually don't feel like I'm intruding. I feel like there's tears that are coming out and there's some kind of, they're releasing something. And I think that's something that's easier to film than people hurting themselves or violence, you know. But I think that comes up, and I think it just it's an in the moment, you know, situation that you have to sort of, you know, that comes up all the time. I remember on one film with Matt Heineman, you know, we had like a screaming fit over whether we should continue filming or not, because the character had a big breakdown on a plane over the Atlantic. And, you know, we stopped filming for like half an hour and discussed it, and we ended up continuing to film, and it's, you know, one probably the better scenes in that film. So you know, it's you have to feel it out, but like you stay emotionally involved, and I think you have to sort of trust your emotional intelligence and your sensibility. You know, where there's no line there, that you just keep feeling it out. I think in every film.
Yeah, I can just agree with everybody. I mean, it also depends on like who you're filming, like how aware is the person, or how aware is the character of, like, you know, what that means to share this moment. Like if you shoot, you know, I shot a study and they're not agreeing to anything. Like, so that's a moment where I would rather switch the camera off, because I know they're not really agreeing. But if the character gives me the signal, you know, that she or he is okay, then I keep shooting. If it helps the story. If it's just, you know, if it's outside the story, then obviously not. But
Well, it seems like you all found the right balance. There's a real humanity and clear eye and you know, sort of piercing perception all wrapped into this movie. So you really did a tremendous job. Are you all planning to work together on Girl State? Is that in the mix, or what's next for this crew?
I hope so.
Is there going to be a Girl State? Yeah, will there be one?
Yeah, very much. We're developing that now. We think it's we call it a sibling and not a sequel. But we're excited to explore that space and see what it has to say about being a girl in 2021 and what it has to say about democracy too. But I loved having spent most of my filmmaking career kind of being lonely in production. I've loved collaborating this way. I wish I could make more films this way. It's kind of crazy, but kind of wonderful and a beautiful way to make movies and to work with fellow artists. So we can't. I mean, this film would be nothing without this incredible team and also Patrick Bresnan and Ivy and Daniel, who I'm sorry he's not here, but it was really, can't wait, whether it's Girl State or something else.
Well, congratulations to all of you. You've really great film. So it's gotten a lot of love, and all of it is well deserved. So congratulations, and thanks everybody for tuning in and for hosting this and being a part of it. It's been really fun.
Thank you, Marshall.
Thank you, Marshall.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Marshall.
Marshall.
Thank you.
You bet.
All right, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this very special edition of Creative Forces. We, of course, like to thank all of our panelists for their insights and sharing the amazing story behind how Boys State came together. Be sure to check out the film on Apple TV+. And if you'd like to learn more about Camera Collective, we'll definitely put their information in the chat below. Thanks again for everyone, and we'll be sure to see you, and we look forward to seeing you in the next event. Thanks so much. Have a great day.